Welcome back, chess friends. It's match number 2, game number 8, and McDonnell is still only one game away from winning this match. He is up 4 games to 3. He was up 4 games to 1, but Bourdonnais has crept back upon him, winning the last 2 games in a row to make it 4-3. So I'm hoping McDonnell can cross the line. If he doesn't, I might take up snooker or pool commentary instead. So Bourdonnais has the white pieces. He opens with d4. We have d5. And now c4, the Queen's Gambit, which of course McDonnell accepts. This is bad news though, because we've seen this 6 times so far and McDonnell has lost every single time. But maybe he's got something else up his sleeve. We have e3, e5, and the bishop captures the pawn. The pawn captures on d4, the white pawn captures back. Knight to f6 from McDonnell, knight to f3 from Bourdonnais, and there's not much different going on from what we've seen in previous games. But here in match number 1, game 17, Morphy said that bishop to e7 is an error, and bishop to d6 is the correct move. But here McDonnell plays bishop to e7, so not great. We have castles and castles from both players, and now h3, knight on b to d7, knight to c3, knight to b6, attacking the bishop, so the bishop goes back to b3. c6 from McDonnell, bishop to e3, developing his second bishop. And now knight on f to d5 from McDonnell. We've seen this position before in match number 1, game 17, although we arrived at the position in a slightly different move order. But at the time, Morphy commented, he said, "McDonnell has now obtained his favourite position in the Queen's Gambit. It is far from being a commendable one." So that sounds pretty ominous, but let's continue. In that game, Bourdonnais played a4, but this time he plays something different, queen to e2. And here the engine says a good move for McDonnell is a5, but instead he plays f5, going for an attack on the king side, and seemingly pinning his own knight here, which might not be too great. But anyway, we continue again. Rook on a to e1, doubling up behind the queen. And now McDonnell continues to push his pawn, f4, attacking the bishop. And Morphy's not happy. He says, "A heedless move that throws away a clear pawn. King to h8 would have been better play." Okay, he didn't move the king. He did indeed push f4. Bourdonnais just captures the pawn here, and of course the knight can't capture the bishop back because it's pinned by the white bishop. And this move also revealed an attack on the black bishop on e7. So what's going to happen? Well, McDonnell captures the white bishop with the rook. The queen captures the black bishop. The queen captures back. The rook captures the queen. And the knight is still pinned here, so McDonnell unpins with king to f8. And now, of course, the rook's under attack as well, so back to e4 with the rook. And now rook back to f6 from McDonnell. So quite a few pieces coming off the board. And now we continue with the knight capturing the knight on d5. The pawn recaptures, attacking the rook at the same time. The bishop can't pick up the pawn because it's defended by the black knight here. So the rook comes back to e3. And now finally McDonnell develops his light square bishop to f5. And we have the white knight jumping into the outpost on e5. And McDonnell plays h6, and the other rook comes across to c1. We have rook to d8, centralizing his rook, and now rook up to c7, infiltrating McDonnell's position. McDonnell plays his bishop back to c8 to protect this pawn, which is under an attack from the rook, but Bourdonnais just brings his other rook to g3, and now he's got a double attack on this pawn next to the king. So McDonnell needs to decide, is this pawn more important than this pawn? He decides that, no, it's not. I'm going to save this one. So he blocks the attack from one of the rooks with bishop to d7, seemingly giving up the left-hand pawn here. But Bourdonnais has spotted things a few moves further ahead. He decides to capture this central pawn with the bishop, and McDonnell captures the bishop back. And this is rather unfortunate because you can see now that this capture will come with a fork which will pick up the rook. So it's looking a bit ominous, but Bourdonnais again doesn't go for this move. Instead, he captures with the rook. McDonnell captures back with his black rook, but this fork is still on, so Bourdonnais immediately captures, and now McDonnell is going to be a whole rook down, as well as being 2 pawns down. So he decides that enough is enough and resigns at this point. And Morphy says, A short contest, indifferently played throughout by McDonnell and presenting no point of interest. Now, look here, Mr. Morphy, we have to respectfully disagree. Chess is always interesting, as we know, and you've made McDonnell very sad. He's put on his shades and he's left quietly. So after being up 4-1 and losing 3 in a row to make it 4-4, all equal, it's come down to game number 9 to decide the winner of match number 2. In the meantime, maybe we should all just calm down with a nice game of pool in the Bourdonnais style at the Gentlemen's Club with whiskey, cigars and ridiculous wagers. I'll see you next time.